This video won't cure your depression. My hope is that it will give you the tools to significantly alleviate it and prevent future episodes. And I don't claim to be an expert on all aspects of depression. It's obviously a complex subject with a neurochemical and environmental basis, but I want to talk about the psychological and emotional aspects in a way that I don't necessarily hear a ton about, so hopefully this will be helpful to you or someone you love. First thing is from David Hawkins' book, Healing and Recovery. He has a whole chapter on depression in there, and he talks about the conditioning that we all get from a young age to feel like happiness comes from the outside sources. And you might hear that and be like, yeah, duh. You might not even question that. That's how deep the conditioning is. But you just have to look at little kids. They have an intrinsic joy until they get that conditioning that their joy is supposed to come from external sources, and then it's set up that way and it becomes a feedback loop. And so whether it's your relationship or dream job or social connections or whatever it is, it feels like that joy is coming from the outside. Not that it's amplified by those things, that it's actually sourced from those outside things. And so inevitably at some point, we lose one or several of those perceived happiness sources. And then we feel depressed or become depressed. And he talks about how happiness comes from within, and that can feel trite and cliche. But again, we think about the innate joy that comes from a young age until it's reconditioned. It's actually coming from within. We just don't want to accept that because it feels true in our experience that it's coming from outside sources. And so the lack of them makes us scared that the future has no meaning, aliveness, purpose, joy, because it feels like the source of it is removed and cannot or will not be returned to us. But it isn't true. It feels true, but it isn't. That fear is a fear. And that sounds obvious, but it's worth saying because it feels like the truth until we examine it. Like, yeah, the future just has no meaning because that source of that joy or that aliveness or that meaning has been removed. But instinctively we know, because instinctively we feel that that source of our good emotions comes from within. We know that on an unconscious level from childhood. Instinctively, we know that it's actually just a fear. So in that chapter, he talks about acknowledging that fear head on as fear, that the future doesn't have that meaning, joy, aliveness, purpose. And if we can acknowledge it as fear, then we can bring it up. We can actually experience it on a physical level as fear safely when we feel ready to. And you can use the letting go technique if and when you feel ready to. There's guided versions on this channel, but start small and do that with professional help or have someone hold space for you while you do that if you feel like you need that. But if you process that fear, then you can begin to face the future through a different lens because that fear isn't coloring your perception of the future. The second thing is from the perspective of parts work, also known as IFS, Internal Family Systems Therapy. And basically it's like you have these different parts within your psyche. You're not just one thing. But when you're depressed, it can feel like, what are you talking about? I'm not a part. I'm John. I'm Sue. I'm depressed. I'm the person. But it's a part. Just like, again, we can think about when we were kids, that joy was naturally there until that depressed part came in, usually to protect us or help us in some way. Usually because it unconsciously believes that you can't handle the grief, the hurt, the sadness, the fear or panic, whatever it is that's underneath that depression that was triggered by those losses or experiences or cumulative experiences. And so if we can acknowledge that part of us that feels like it's depressing our system for a reason, We can ask it when it feels ready if it would be willing to step aside so that we can work with the other parts that feel grief or feel fear or feel hurt or whatever it is, feel separated. And so we can do this with the help of an IFS trained therapist or an EMDR therapist, an EFT practitioner, a somatically oriented trauma-informed therapist, someone who will work with the body and the whole system to address it. So it's not just talk therapy and you're just going over stuff on an intellectual level that you probably already understand, but the energy isn't moving. And so the understanding from David Hawkins and working with that fear and the understanding of the parts can be used together. The third thing is from a book I've been reading called Bittersweet by Susan Cain, and in it she describes depression as a black hole where no light can get in. And I thought that was kind of an illustrative description, pretty apt. And I thought about the antidote to that as being awareness. Now, awareness as a word is kind of like watered down, it's been diluted, it can feel meaningless, but we can describe it poetically because it's kind of hard to describe scientifically, but it's like a light. And when someone is in that gravitational pull of depression, it's like everything is bound together, everything is tangled. The heaviness of the emotions, the gravity of the experience, the intensity and loudness of the thoughts are all bound together. And it feels like you are that bound up ball of darkness. And awareness is like a light. And awareness has a loving quality to it, not in a sentimental sense, but in a sense of healing. It has a loving, healing quality to it, and it helps things separate. It helps you get space. So instead of everything being bound together, the awareness coming in and shining a light allows you to get space and see you are not that experience, you are not those thoughts, you are not those emotions, even though it feels like you are when you're in the thick of it. And so introducing awareness can be done in so many different ways. It can be hard to get the light through those cracks at first, so you might have to be creative, you might have to be persistent, you might have to be patient. But it could look like meditating, which can be very difficult at first, so you might have to poke around and find meditations that work for you in some way, even a little bit. It can look like working with a practitioner or therapist that can help reflect back to you in a compassionate way and work through things and emotions with you. It can look like journaling, which is literally getting your thoughts and emotions on paper so that you have a literal separation and awareness from them and can organize them as opposed to them being completely scattered and disjointed. It can look like reading a book like Letting Go by David Hawkins that has an extremely high frequency, that has that energy of awareness. Even just reading a couple pages of a book like that every day can bring in the light of awareness. Listening to music that feels poignant or uplifting to you in some way. Talking to a friend that reflects that awareness energy back to you in some way. All these things introduce that awareness energy to the system, and that awareness energy is like magic. It has a light and a life of its own. It has a healing quality all on its own, and it will tend to mysteriously, magically transform your experience, your perception, your thoughts in a positive way, just by bringing a little bit of it at a time into the system until you can hopefully bring more, until there's a critical mass, until hopefully those clouds can part and not just a little ray of light can get in, but the whole sun can start to shine through again. The last thing I want to share is my experience of the worst depression I've experienced, which was I was in my room, couldn't get out of bed most days, couldn't leave my room most days, only did because one of my friends lived in the same building and he would knock very aggressively on my door until I would get up and come see the sun with him. And one day he said, Cyrus, I hear everything you're saying about what you're going through, but you might want to consider picking one thing that's high leverage, doing it every day for 30 days, and making that your criteria for success. And I picked going to the gym. And I did exercise almost every day for 30 days, and that was my criteria for success for the day. If I didn't do anything else, it was fine, because at least I did that. And some days I did other things because I had a little bit of momentum. And then when that month was up, I stacked on meditation as a second habit. So it was just working out and meditating every day was my criteria for success. And that was eminently more doable because I had the momentum from the first month. And so on and so forth, until I had several positive habits after a few months, and the depression started to alleviate because there was enough awareness there to start to work through the emotions that were behind it. So I realize that it's not that simple for everyone, but hopefully that can be at least a foundational understanding that sometimes when we're in significant or severe depressions, or depressive states, we don't have the energy, the will to do almost anything that can make us feel helpless, that can make us feel down on ourselves and critical towards ourselves. But that's where compassion comes in, which can be difficult to conjure, I understand. But if we can be as gentle, as patient, as compassionate as we possibly can towards ourselves, and surround ourselves with that energy to whatever extent we can, then we can do one thing at a time and slowly start to get the system back online so that we can move in a healing direction. So I hope this helps in some way. If you want to share your experiences, your thoughts, or any questions, feel free to let me know. And I wish you the best. Much love.